you. All right, so I'm ready to get started if that's okay with everyone else. So welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. My name is Ben Bronner. I'm a teaching assistant professor in the Department of Strategic Management and Public Policy in the business school. And if you have not seen it, if you just joined perhaps, I'm going to put the link in the chat again to the conference program. And if you go there, if you click there, one of the things you can do is scroll down to the section titled Audience Members, and then there are some subsections: brainstorming questions, how to construct good questions. Subsections will have guidance or tips about how to come up with good constructive questions. And so you might look through those tips, and then write down any questions that come to you about the presenters today, because we will have an opportunity after the presentation to ask the questions. And we will have our presenters going one after the other. So save your questions until the very end, and we'll have one question and answer session. So with that said, our first presenter is Faye Tyschper. So Faye, if you're ready, take it away.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Let's see. Awesome. Okay, can everybody see? I'll put it in present mode. Is everybody able to see this? Okay, awesome. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Faye Tyschper, and I'm a second-year international affairs student who took UW 1020 Writing for Social Change with Professor Ryder last spring. I am so excited and honored to be speaking with you tonight. So I'll be taking you through my end of semester research project called Beyond Language: Navigating Culturally Cognizant Volunteerism, reflecting on my time volunteering as a Te Geo mentor with the Latino Student Fund, whose aim is to increase educational attainment for DC's Latino population, offering post-secondary preparatory workshops for Spanish-speaking students at Coolidge High School in Ward 4. In this course, we partnered with a DC nonprofit organization and used our experience volunteering to answer a research question that we developed at the start of the semester. So upon choosing LSF as my partner for the semester, my question became, what guidance should community organizations provide to volunteers who are culturally external to the populations that they serve on how to recognize and encompass cultural differences while volunteering, but not see cultural difference as something that hinders connecting with the community? I feared that providing mentorship to a community that I was not culturally a part of would be seen as something adjacent to white saviorism, and wondered how organizations like LSF could equip future volunteers who might be in similar situations with resources to make their mentorship as effective as possible and avoid this perception of saviorism and engage with the communities just simply beyond language. First, I'd like to share, however, how volunteering has sort of shaped my life and my interest in asking this question. Growing up, community service was a constant since my parents owned a bakery that was constantly involved in local events like serving breakfasts at turkey trots on Thanksgiving and fundraiser marathons, giving me my first taste of community engagement. Through community volunteering, I discovered the power of connecting with people from different backgrounds. I was also a part of my school district's language program, where I earned the Illinois State Seal of Biliteracy in Spanish upon graduating. So when I moved to DC, I wondered how I could use these language skills and my passion for volunteerism to connect with people in a new context, which then became the foundation of my research. So to begin with a brief outline of what my paper looked like, the first portion introduced my research question and explained how my values motivated me to pursue it. Then I provided context on the community I was serving, which was Ward 4, a predominantly Latino community in DC, who has been perpetually underserved by public education. I used the data from DC Office of Planning to materialize this injustice, and afterwards I gave background information on the Latino Student Fund itself, such as their mission statement and different programs they offered. Then I discussed a conceptual framework I used to approach my volunteerism, which was Gloria Ladson-Billings' culturally relevant pedagogy, which I'll explain in depth in a few moments, and then how I applied it to answer my question. Finally, I reflected on what I learned from the experience and provided an answer to that question to close out the paper. So like I mentioned, my paper is about LSF is based on Gloria Ladson-Billings' culturally relevant pedagogy, and specifically my first workshop that I conducted for it. So in her work, Ladson-Billings studies African American classrooms and examines how educators influence student achievement. And she found that when teaching students poetry, for example, student achievement soared when she did so through teaching it through rap verses that were commonly played in these areas. She also found that successful educators were conscious of different learning styles, which allowed students to perceive themselves as capable learners by seeing success in the classroom. And she concludes that connecting with different cultures goes beyond language and requires mentors to develop socio-political consciousness or a recognition of how another culture is perceived in relation to others. She notes that educators should use consciousness to empower the systematically underserved to spark institutional reform. And as students see themselves as these capable learners, they're not only more active participants in the classroom, but also in their community. Now, taking Ladson-Billings' findings into account at LSF, my role wasn't just to speak to students in a way that they could understand, but also encourage them to speak out against institutional injustice. In my first workshop, I asked students to create vision boards on Canva to demonstrate some of their personal goals, and the activity met the CRP framework in two key ways. First, in language congruence, I switched between speaking English and Spanish to make sure they could understand the information, obviously. And secondly, I conducted research beforehand on the educational inequity the DC Latino population has faced, and actually found that it has the highest percentage of males and females without a high school diploma, with only 28.2% of Latinx women and 29.7% of men completing high school. And when compared for the same metric to white residents, only 0.7% of women and only 0.6% of men, which makes that statistic even more startling. Now, this activity prompted students to reflect on how their identity influences their aspirations, which may be used as a marker for sparking institutional reform by recognizing that some institutions inhibit them from reaching their goals based on their background. So in other words, I kind of summarized it on this slide. Their identity may lead them to questioning their positionality in existing institutions and then may inspire them to take action. So in just 1 hour, I began to see how students saw their goals translate into action, and one student described her goal as being the first to go to college to show my sister that she can too. And this goal was special because it demonstrated the path of CRP coming to fruition. Through her goal of going to college, given that nobody else in her family had, it made her question why this may be, and if this is attributed to institutional inequity, the student may be more inclined to set this precedent and advocate for others in her community to have the same opportunity. Now, reflecting on this experience, I returned to my original research question. I concluded that recommendations must be made to organizations to provide comprehensive orientation materials that encompass, first, the background of the community, including things like data and statistics on how a community has been underserved, as well as its historical importance, so volunteers understand how their identities themselves may be perceived in relation to the one that they're serving. Additionally, resources to help volunteers learn Spanish or any other language they might be using if they don't have a high proficiency, including online platforms or key phrases that may make it easier or helpful to communicate. It's also important to recognize that not all forms of communication within the same language function the same way. So acknowledging different dialects within different contexts is also something that these community organizations need to provide, and that's vital. Now, before closing out, I'd be remiss not to say that I was not uneasy before this workshop. I mean, how could I expect this group of students to listen to anything that I had to say? And I found CRP somewhat calming in this sense because not only did I have a familiarity of the language that I was walking into, but I was also equipped with the knowledge on how the group I was mentoring was institutionally underserved before even walking into the situation. I learned that while I can't always control how I'm perceived by others, I can control how I prepare. And it's about acquiring awareness before stepping into a space that I am external to that is really of most importance. And if community organizations adopt this same logic, they could provide guidance to volunteers who are culturally external from the start, supporting volunteers that are in similar situations that I was. This also may inspire a future with greater equity, understanding, cultural cognizance, and cultural connectivity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Faye. Thank you for that great presentation. And again, for all the audience members, we will have one Q&A session at the very end. So if that presentation inspired questions, comments, things you want to talk further about with Faye, please write them down so you don't forget, so that you will be able to come back to those thoughts during our Q&A session. But next, we have a presentation from Amelia Eager. So Amelia, if you're ready, go ahead.
Yes, let me just share my screen really quickly. Okay. Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Amelia Eager, and I'm a sophomore studying political communications with SMPA here at GW. And my UW 1020 was Linguistic Landscapes of Opportunity, Rhetoric and the American Dream with Professor O. So my project was a little bit unorthodox. I decided to take photographs along with writing my research paper, so I'll show some of my photography within it. The title of my project was Shadows on the Capitol, Unveiling the Silent Crisis on Homelessness in Washington, D.C. So before I begin, I'd like to give a brief history of homelessness in the US. So homelessness was first introduced in the United States in the 1870s when they were referred to as tramps. They were traveling around the world in search of work. So the emphasis at this time was actually on the loss of character and moral crisis that contradicted the societal standard of a home, where there was a lack of a permanent home. So instead of housing being the main solution, a lack of jobs was seen as the problem. And the next phase was about 10 years later in the 1880s, where the term hobos came into place. So they first appeared in Western America and softened the public perception of homelessness. This period of homelessness was often romanticized in American literature by authors like Walt Whitman, and they would write about homelessness as a call to the road and an escape from the oppression of factory work. This romanticization continued until the late 1920s, transforming into what we consider homelessness today. And this concept consists of factors like mental health, high unemployment rate, deep budget cuts to the US Department of Housing. So in 2023, DC experienced a high in homelessness after the COVID-19 pandemic. They counted 4,922 unhoused people, which is an 11.6% increase from 2022. And of those 4,922 people, 50% of them experienced homelessness for the first time, as you can see in this graph. So this is a paragraph that I wrote from my research paper, and I think it helps encapsulate why I chose to do this project. So growing up in New York City, I was immersed in the beautiful yet often cruelest nice life of urban life, where the towering skyscrapers, hustling businessmen and women hid the stark realities of homelessness that loomed its bustling streets. Despite being surrounded by this visible manifestation of societal inequity, I, like many others, was conditioned to avert my gaze, to shield myself from the discomfort it stirred within me. It became second nature to navigate the city streets with blinders on, ignoring those who are less fortunate than myself. So this is one of the reasons why I decided to use photography in my project, so that I and others who viewed my photos couldn't look away anymore. And these are a couple of the photos that I took. These are all past Elliott School, so right on campus on 21st and East Street. So going back to my professor's topic, the American dream, is it attainable? The American dream traditionally embodies the belief that through hard work and determination and opportunity, anyone can achieve success and prosperity. However, the reality is that homelessness directs a direct contrast to this. Homelessness in America is seen as a failure of the American dream. It's a situation where individuals or families lack stable housing, often struggling with poverty, unemployment, or inadequate access to resources and support systems. For many experiencing homelessness, the promise of the American dream seems distant or unattainable. Homelessness is a cycle of disadvantage, and this cycle contradicts the narrative of the American dream, which emphasizes upward social mobility and equal opportunity for all. Addressing homelessness involves not only providing immediate shelter and support, but also tackling the root causes that prevent individuals from realizing their full potential. By addressing issues such as affordable housing, economic inequality, and access to healthcare and social services, society can work towards aligning the reality of homelessness with the principles of the American dream, ensuring that everyone has a fair chance to thrive. And now I'll give some of my tips for a successful project. Something that was really helpful for me was picking a topic that I was interested and passionate about. My professor gave us a lot of freedom, which was really nice. So I decided that I wanted to incorporate photography in my project, and that made it a lot more enjoyable for me to work on because we know it is like a very long project. My second tip is to meet with your professors and librarians at Gelman. They truly know the best tips for research and finding accurate information, and I found that to be really helpful. And my last tip is to just get creative. The best thing about this project is the freedom you have with it. I know my professor allowed us to use any form of multimedia within our presentations. So that was super fun and helpful. But yeah, that's my project. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Amelia. Really appreciate that. Great presentation. And again, if anyone has questions for Amelia or thoughts, comments, connections with the other presentations, any thoughts that occur to you, please go ahead and jot those down, write down some notes so that during our Q&A at the end tonight, you can refer to your notes and remember what you wanted to ask or talk about. So finally, we have a presentation from Kamara Butler. So Kamara, go ahead.
Oh no. Okay. Oh wait. Sorry. Okay. Hi, I'm Kamara. I'm a sophomore, and today we're going to talk about racism, urban privatization, and the degradation of the third space. So for some background, in my UW, we focused on social justice-oriented writing and complaint within that. And we were prompted to think about issues in our lives and what those complaints related to on a broader level. And my initial complaint was like, I felt like there's nothing to do for free in DC. And it was something shared with my roommate and like other students in my class. So I was like, okay, this is a thing. And at the same time, my social media had a lot of discussion of like the third space. So I wanted to investigate like academically what is the third space and what's happening to them. So this is an overview of my argument. I talk about the third space, bourgeois discomfort, inaccessibility, and social degradation, responsibility of privatized space, suburbanization, and leisure class and public health. I can't touch on everything that I write about in this presentation, but I hope I can properly articulate my argument. So what is the third space? There are two scholars that talk about this very interestingly. Oldenburg and Harvey have two different interpretations. Oldenburg says the third space is like a social pillar of the community. It helps to nurture the spirit of the city and offer a space that is different from the home or work. That's its thirdness. And Harvey kind of yes ands Oldenburg's argument, saying that these third spaces or public open spaces are integral to sociopolitical organizing, and they must be free. So like a cafe or a barbershop would be a third space to Oldenburg, but not to Harvey, because there is that like monetary element within it. And this paper and argument, every public open space or third space discussed follows Harvey's approach for its more like class aware and Marxian approach to third space. So Harvey talks a lot about bourgeois discomfort and how third spaces are like majorly significant in sociopolitical organizing and integral to a functional democracy for their ability to allow a space for protest. And he cites like urban privatization as being a direct result of bourgeois discomfort and how it directly represents bourgeois individuals who are uncomfortable sharing space with those different to them, seeking to create an enclave to make separation between themselves and other members of society. And Nasution and Zahara expand on this. They are two social scientists doing research out of Jakarta, and they talk about how quality of life within cities is directly dependent on the urban environment around people. And so they conducted the study between two parks, one public and one private, and it revealed that the private was more accessible, better managed, and safer at night, while the public wasn't able to keep up to the same standards, and park goers were ultimately dissatisfied with the park itself. And it really highlights how privatization, though able to improve quality of life and experience for those able to buy their entrance, ultimately creates barriers to accessible and safe civic experiences for those who are unable to pay. Oliveras writes out of Spain, and she highlights this like disconnect between city planning and what is actually beneficial for citizens. She talks a lot about city conceptual idealism within private construction and how that doesn't really equate to satisfaction among citizens. And she communicates this frustration with how a lot of these complaints on behalf of citizens are unquantifiable. But ultimately, the importance in her writing is this highlighting of a discontinuity between architecture and urban planning's dual purposes in advancing capital and its presentation while also benefiting a common populace. For example, like a gigantic modern skyscraper could look cool, but it's not really going to help people have a better quality of life. Lowe talks about suburbanization, specifically in Southern California, and the relationship between public funding and private communities. So gated communities are driven by like a desire for security and exclusivity. But on the other hand, they directly divert resources away from public infrastructure, often like worsening the issues that people seek to escape when entering gated communities. So she kind of talks about how like this trend of suburbanization leads to increased socioeconomic segregation and really erodes community bonds, as all the funding, or not all, but most funding that would usually go to the public sphere ends up in the private. And this relationship really undermines a social fabric in cities and greater communities by prioritizing private interests over those of the public. Brownson kind of ties a lot of these ideas together by talking about leisure class and public health. He uses a survey done in the United States to talk about physical activity, employment status, and access to land, and how that relates to the third space. He covers this like statistical piece that Oliveras writes about being as unquantifiable in her specific environment. And his argument is kind of that though rates of leisure like amongst Americans are rising and access to third spaces, they're not for less socioeconomically advantaged individuals. And he cites a failure in policy for this, I think specifically around minimum wage. And the major takeaway from this is that oversights in policy have enabled disparities in access to leisure. So this is directly from my paper, but in unification, the issue of privatization is one birthed from bourgeois fear and class tension. It's enabled by oversight on behalf of cities and organizations that often rely on the feelings of the masses and the working class as unquantifiable and secondary to justify their actions. The existence of these spaces in proximity to their public counterparts serves to directly degrade the third space, and there is a direct correlation between these civic issues and the quality of life for those living within cities historically and at present. So in my counter argument and kind of issues within my research, I talk about the vastness of data that I use, and how that can kind of hinder the strength of the claim because it's difficult to pinpoint direct causation behind the issues within each city. because we're also talking about like 19th century Paris, contemporary Jakarta, Barcelona, Southern California, and I think New York as well for Oldenburg. I forgot to put that in there. But it really highlights, like, the issues of the paper highlight the need for further research in the sorry, sirens, in the historicization of global privatization. And I hope the general message that you're getting from this research process was there's a current rise in privatization in cities across the globe. Citizens experience growing social stratification and the creation of class enclaves because of this. At present, there are declines in physical and social activity in cities. City planning has codified norms around land and space use that are contrary to the advice of sociologists and sociology-oriented architects. And further research is needed to adequately understand the systems that enable privatization. And the big idea that kind of runs through these messages and the general arguments I make throughout my paper is that socioeconomic systems that do not prioritize the masses serve to degrade them. And into my research and writing process, when doing research papers, I like to have a very robust note-taking situation. On the left, these are from an annotated bibliography that I did, and you can kind of see how different points made, color-coded, end up in this kind of grand unified argument that can become your like intro paragraph, and you can see kind of how your evidence cascades into one another, and then that can kind of help order your paper. These are my works cited. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kamara. I was just jotting down a question I have in case I get a chance to ask it. So I was slow there to unmute myself. But thank you so much. That was a really interesting presentation. And thank you again to Faye and Amelia for their presentations as well. So we are now in the Q&A part of tonight's session. So audience members, if you have your Zoom window full screen, at the bottom there should be a button that says reactions. You click on that, one of the reactions is raise hand. So feel free, if you have questions to ask, to raise your digital hand, and I can call on people. You can ask questions, or if you prefer, you can type a question into the chat box. So I'll let you all take a minute or two to gather your thoughts, check on any notes you might have been taking during the presentations, and either raise your digital hand to ask a question or put questions in the chat box. I'll also add, your questions can, of course, focus on kind of the substantive content of the research that each of these students did. Or if you want to ask more procedural questions about how to pick a project, how to undertake a research project, how to go about writing the paper, you can kind of focus on that as well. Any of those questions are valid. And I apologize in advance for messing up pronunciation of names. Okay, so first I see, again, I apologize if this is not how you pronounce it. Dila or Dila, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, so I have a question towards Amelia's presentation, and it's specifically, how do you think DC, with its concentration of political power and wealth, can be a unique case study for addressing homelessness compared to other US cities?
That's a very good question. Obviously, with the amount of power that DC holds, it might be easy for people to focus on that when coming to DC. And, you know, as I talked about in my presentation, I feel like within our society, it's very easy to just like look away and avert our gaze, as many people have done. Part of my research project wasn't necessarily to come up with a solution to homelessness, more shine a light on something that isn't normally talked about. But I mean, there are so many issues in society that are being talked about in the hub right here in DC, and I think that this is something that needs to be looked on more for sure.
And as we
Thank
go
you.
through the Q&A tonight, if there are any follow-ups from the question asker or anyone else who wants to jump in, that's fine as well. So please don't hesitate to ask follow-ups. Yes, Jacob.
First off, thank you for 3 amazing presentations. It was delightful to get to learn with all of you tonight. So my question is for Faye. I'm curious. I am considering. I teach UW courses as well, and I would like to consider using community partners in my courses in the future. I'm curious what your first day with your community partner was like, or your first couple of days, perhaps. Was it awkward? Was it weird? Was it, a great relationship right from the start?
No, it's a really great question. I think one of the biggest things that we talked about at the start of our course was kind of, even before we knew who our community partners were going to be, who we kind of wanted to work with, we really focused on the fact that establishing that connection with that community organization before you even start volunteering is going to set the tone kind of for the rest of your semester. So I remember the first time that I met the coordinator that I had kind of been communicating with before I conducted my workshop. I actually met her like 30 minutes before I was supposed to give my workshop. So it was definitely kind of like a little quick turnaround, but I found that, I came in with questions that I had about the organization, kind of about the organization's history, what I had read. I made sure to do a little bit of research on kind of what they had done in the past, what successful volunteers in the past have done that they found have really made effective mentorship. And I found that asking those questions right from the start kind of set those expectations of what was expected of me. And then also I was able to kind of express what I was anticipating from the workshop as well. So I think that establishing that community connection right from the get-go is super important. And if you can meet with your community organization beforehand, before the first day of your workshop, I think that would be great because you're able to make that relationship and kind of transition into your work a little bit easier.
So
Thank you.
we have several questions in the chat. So thank you everyone who's been submitting your questions to the chat. So just starting at the top, Richard asks, and this is a question for any or all of the 3 presenters tonight. Looking back, how could you have improved your paper? Or if I can add something related, what is maybe the one thing that you wish you had done differently or would do differently if you were to conduct a similar project again? If I can add that to Richard's very good question. So it's fine to take a minute or two to kind of collect your thoughts, but if any of you, Faye, Amelia, Kamara, anyone who wants to jump in on that, please just feel free to take the lead.
I have a thought on this because I was thinking about it a lot. I feel like, at least for my paper, I like what I talk about in my like kind of limitations of my research. Like I would have liked to have been able to get more into that historicization aspect and kind of like understanding what was going on in each specific city or location that I talk about. But I feel like that's kind of the issue when you're writing papers, especially for classes like these, is like you just don't have the time to really research all of that. But it would have been really cool to look more into that causation behind every piece of evidence. But the kind of like advice for just writing in general, I feel like once you start researching, you get a feel for kind of the puddle that you're diving into within like whatever you're looking into. So like even though you don't maybe have all the answers, you get a general idea of what's going on and you can very much speak to that within your own analysis of whatever you're researching or thinking about.
Thank you, Kamara. Faye, Amelia, if either of you would like to add your own thoughts, please feel free to jump in. Although, of course, you don't have to each answer.
Yeah, I would say one of the things particularly for me that I wish I would have kind of included a little bit more was I tended, I think, to focus on my paper on kind of like the broad aspect of me delivering my workshop as a mentor, like kind of from my perspective, from an educational perspective, how was I going to relay the sort of concrete information to this group of students? And I think I could have included more. Now looking back on it, I had so many just really special one-on-one conversations with some of the students as they were making their vision boards. I was walking around to each table, asking them about their goals, why they chose to incorporate certain pictures on some goals. And I got to learn a lot about who these students were as people more than they were just students. I got to learn about their favorite TV shows. I got to learn about what their favorite foods were, what their favorite community traditions were. And I think, building on that linguistic congruence piece, I think I could have emphasized more that linguistic congruence leads to making those really profound personal connections, because I thought that was a really, really impactful part of my holistic experience.
Do you want to go ahead, Amelia?
Yeah, I was just gonna say quickly, one thing that I wish that I did touch on more is the difference between homelessness in many different cities in the US. I think that would have been cool to look at the contrast between all of them. Unfortunately, there's only so much room that I had in my paper, and I did go a little bit over the page limit already, so I didn't have time to talk about that. But yeah, I think that, and looking at the chat, I'm answering some of these questions already. But yeah, I didn't have the time or availability to do that, but I think that would have been something interesting to add.
Yeah, great. So you're right. You are kind of answering at least one of the questions in the chat, which asked, did you compare different cities in your research? And if so, what were the differences between cities? So since Amelia has kind of jumped on that question, I think it would be a good idea to tackle a few of the related questions, also asking about Amelia's project. And then I will come back to this question for Kamara that's also in the chat about her research process, the number of sources she used, whether she used archival sources. But Amelia, since you did kind of jump into some of these questions in the chat about your project, could you also speak on kind of some related issues? How did completing this project challenge you or shift your view of things, shift your worldview from Charlotte? And relatedly, sorry, there's so many Amelia questions. I'm trying to sort out which ones you've answered. I think one of the questions asked whether you had spoken to anyone who is currently experiencing homelessness. I believe, I don't see that now, but oops. I just typed in the word experiencing. I was trying to search. I'm going to delete that comment. I was trying to search the comments because I believe I saw one that said, during your research, did you talk to anyone currently experiencing homelessness? I'm not seeing that now, but I might just be getting lost in kind of the stream of comments.
Yeah, I see the comment. I see the question. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I feel like these two questions kind of go hand in hand for me. I did actually get to speak with a man who he used to sit outside the CVS on campus right across the street from the student center. Unfortunately, he wasn't comfortable me using him in his project, which was totally fine. So I won't talk too much about it, but yeah, being able to directly speak with someone who I used to walk past every day going to my classes was really valuable. Getting that hands-on experience with it yeah, it was super valuable. And he also actually worked at Miriam's Kitchen, which my roommate worked on. It's a food shelter on campus as well. So that was very cool. And getting that hands-on experience definitely shifted my worldview. I mean, growing up in the city, I there are so many stereotypes of homeless people where they're dangerous, you should avoid them. And getting to have these one-on-one conversations with these homeless people just really humanize them, honestly. And they're people, they're just like you and I. They just don't have access to the same resources that we do.
Yeah, thank you, Amelia. I really appreciate those comments kind of tackling a few more of the questions in the chat for you. So with that said, let's go back to the question I skipped over. So this is for Kamara. Roughly what number of sources did you need to conduct? What number of sources did you need in order to conduct a thorough research process? And did you use archival sources or archival websites like JSTOR? Is Kamara frozen perhaps? It looks like Kamara might be frozen. Kamara, if you can hear us and are able to rejoin, please feel free to take a stab at that question. In the meantime, however, while Kamara maybe reconnects, hopefully, I think if I'm not getting lost in the queue, the next question that has not yet been answered is a question from Gabe. So Gabe asks, what was your favorite aspect of the paper and one thing you wish you had done differently? So I think that we'll come back to that, Gabe. So Kamara, I think you were frozen. Did you hear the question that was asked?
Hi. Sorry, yeah, my Wi-Fi is not very good right now.
No worries.
I think so. It was about research. How many sources?
How many sources do you need in order to conduct a thorough research project? And did you use archival sources like the example given was JSTOR?
I couldn't really give you a number. My Professor Erfani, really emphasized the importance of like the research process and how in doing that you kind of need to just consult a lot, get a feel for like what you're researching and who are the scholars within that, and then kind of like specialize your searches like with the libraries to kind of like find the niche. So I really couldn't tell you an amount of researches that I consulted. I definitely use JSTOR. I use that a lot. But I'd say like in terms of like an hour amount like of time, I'd say maybe like over the course of like a few weeks, maybe like 3 or 4, maybe 5 hours of research, and then like a lot of thinking on top of that, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Kamara. I think that addresses the question very well. So, as I was saying before Kamara was able to rejoin us, I think the next question, kind of going from top to bottom of the chat, the next question has not yet been fully answered. It's Gabe's question. Gabe asks, what was your favorite aspect of your paper and one thing you wish you had done differently? I do think we've covered the one thing you wish you had done differently because there was a previous question about how would you improve your paper. But maybe we can concentrate on the other part of Gabe's question. What was the favorite aspect of your paper? And again, if any of our presenters from tonight want to jump in, please feel free to just take the lead whenever you're ready. And you can focus maybe either on kind of the substantive research, what you found out, what you learned, or a favorite part of the process of writing the paper. Writing or researching.
Something that I really enjoyed in my research was seeing how different scholars kind of connect to each other and like cite each other or are in conversation with one another. It like creates a very interesting kind of like cascade or like web of ideas, and it was just really cool seeing or like really being able to like explore the academic community that I was kind of like interacting with or like really just scratching the surface of. It was just really satisfying to be able to understand what was happening over there.
Yeah, I'll answer that as well. I think my favorite part, I mean, honestly, this was like my favorite project that I've done here at GW. So I really like that I got to incorporate photography into it because that's something that I'm super passionate about. I loved being able to research on this topic that I'm also passionate about. That's why I said in my tips, like, really choose a topic that you have like a real interest in, because it makes going to class and doing all of this research and writing so much easier and actually gets you like excited to do it all.
Yeah, and for me, kind of going off of like the passion piece, I thought so. I guess it's useful to kind of have a little bit of background on how this writing for social change was structured. So you develop this research question at the beginning of the semester, and you work with this organization that you choose throughout the entirety of the semester. So it's honestly a really beautiful thing to see this organization that you have now this personal connection with, that your values really align with, kind of see that blossom and grow throughout the semester and culminate into this final project that you can produce that it's really based not only on, scholarly research and this conceptual framework, but also your personal experience and, you're in most cases on the ground, serving these communities, and the one-on-one interactions that you make or that you have with these people, nobody can take away from you. You use them as evidence in your writing. And I think that's just a really, really beautiful thing. And I think it was also a very calming experience for me because I was very nervous moving to such a big city. I come from a very small suburban town. So being able to have that element of continuity through volunteerism, something that I was used to, and being able to use that in a new context, I found that to be really comforting as a freshman trying to navigate a new city. So that was probably my favorite part.
Thank you to each of our presenters for those answers. The next question in the chat, going from top to bottom, is about differences in homeless populations between DC and New York City. I believe that was addressed by Amelia already when she was discussing how she was only able to focus on DC in her paper. Amelia, you can correct me if that's wrong, but I believe that's been addressed. So going down below that, and this will probably be the last question we have time for. Where did each of you get the ideas for your project? And how do you narrow down your topic? And if I can add one more thing, because there's one more question that is directly related to this. Amelia, when you're addressing that question, when you're addressing the question about where you got your idea for, or where you got your idea from, you can also address this next question in the chat that says, what inspired you to explore the connection between homelessness and the American dream? So we've got kind of a general question, where did you get your ideas from? And then for Amelia in particular, where did you get this idea to look at the connection between homelessness and the American dream? Whoever would like to lead us away, whoever is ready, feel free to jump in and take the lead. It's fine for you to take a few moments to collect your thoughts, of course.
I can start. Since my UW was about complaintive writing and using like academic complaint to write for like social justice issues, it kind of just very much fit. Like I was inspired by the fact that this is a real issue that exists and affects people, and it isn't really talked about as much as I wish it would be. So yeah, it made sense, and it was something that I was genuinely interested in.
Yeah, for mine, within my UW, we learned, like throughout the whole semester, we learned a lot about people who aren't, like, we learned about immigration, we learned about segregation, just people. Basically the class was like tailored around people who are not in favor of the American dream, or who like the American dream like negatively impacts. So I started to look around DC, and homelessness like immediately caught my eye because it's so prevalent in our city. So obviously homelessness is a direct contrast to the American dream, and this connection helped my research and my paper because it was something that I was really passionate about and fueled by.
For me, I would say it was honestly a culmination of wanting to be able to continue my linguistic abilities, and then also kind of combining that with my passion for and value of education. So actually, I've been speaking Spanish since I was in kindergarten, and the semester that I took my UW class would have been like the first time in my life, in my educational career, where I hadn't have been taking a have been taking a Spanish class. So I really wanted to obviously keep up my Spanish, be able to use my language in a way and that I wouldn't quote unquote lose it, but also in a way that was impactful. And when I saw LSF as a community partner option, it was kind of just like this light bulb went off in my head, because I'm also somebody that has always valued education, has seen it as it is an immense privilege. And so it was kind of almost like this perfect fit, that I was able to, you know, be able to still use my linguistic ability in a way that what I would hope would have a very profound impact on a topic that I am very passionate about and that I really wanted to spend my semester researching. So it was kind of like this perfect storm, if you will.
Awesome. So thank you, Faye. Thank you, Amelia. Thank you, Kamara, both for the presentations and for your insightful, in-depth answers to the questions asked tonight. And thank you to all the audience members who submitted questions. And thank you for all the audience members' attention, participation. That wraps it up for tonight. We are at time. And I appreciate everyone's participation in making this event tonight what it was. Thank you guys and have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.